First guest was briefed by top Trump administration officials on the Venezuela operation last night. Talking about ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Adam Smith, who is with me now. Very glad you're here. I used the word buy. It was the word buy. And CNN learned that Marco Rubio told you at yesterday's briefing that the goal is to actually buy Greenland, not use military invasion. Is that really what he said?
Well, it's not what Trump has said. They've made offers around that before. But look, you got to take a step back from all this. There's different strategic interests. And by the way, we have a military base on Greenland. Mm-hmm. Denmark, Greenland, I visited that military base just a few months ago. If we want greater access to Greenland, there's no reason on earth that Denmark won't give it to us. So why is Trump doing all of this threatening?
Why?
At the end of the day, it's about power and control. Trump wants to be able to say, we're the United States of America, we can do whatever we want. And in his mind, coercion is the path forward. And that is worrisome. He is coercing friends, allies, enemies, everyone he can possibly coerce and threaten. That's what he's doing. And his assumption is they will become afraid of us and they'll do what we want. They do have other options.
Like what?
Well, China, Russia, telling us to just basically go to hell, that they're not going to work with us. And I always cite this example. The drug problem is a major problem. One of the biggest successes that we had with the drug problem was Plan Colombia, where we worked with the Colombian government back in, I want to say, late 90s, early 2000s, to combine forces, work together, and fight them. And it worked quite effectively. Trump thinks that you can come in, punch everybody in the face, and just do what you want, in part because that's his mode of operations just in general, and in part because he views the world as this zero-sum game of dominance. He wants to dominate the Western Hemisphere. Threats are part of that.
I wonder if there is not enough contemplation about a longer end game. Do you really think that his whole goal is just to collect pieces on a puzzle and say, I've got these? Or the idea of the rare earth minerals, the idea of natural resources, he would suggest it's about trying to promote national security. Is there any truth to that?
Well, certainly, sprinkled within this are some basic rational arguments. You cannot argue, first of all, that Chavez and Maduro destroyed the Venezuelan economy. They did. Mm-hmm. And they made it a very dangerous country, both in terms of the drugs, in terms of the migration. You can't argue with the fact that Greenland is a strategic asset for its mineral wealth, for its location, a whole bunch of different things. So sprinkled within it, there are national security pieces. The problem for America is Trump's approach is going to get us to the opposite result because it's going to push people away from us. Our greatest strength internationally has been our partners and allies. I was in China a couple months ago in terms of how China views us. Mm-hmm. One of the things they see that we have so many partners and allies, that makes us stronger and then weaker. Trump is detonating all of those alliances. And also, when it comes to Latin America and Venezuela, if we want to say Maduro is a terrible, awful guy, we're going to go in there, we're going to work with the Venezuelan people to improve the quality of their lives. That's one thing. But if we say, look, we're going to run your country and we want your oil, that reminds people of why they supported Chavez in the first place. Because Chavez stood up and said, American imperialism is destroying us. And that met a lot of sympathetic ears in Venezuela and Latin America. We do have a history in Cuba before Castro of exploiting the Cuban people in a way that gave rise to these movements that are terrible. Communism, socialism doesn't work, never works. Mm-hmm. All right? But if we want to push people away from that, we have to show them a better way. And a better way isn't, we're from America, we're going to coerce you to give us what we want, and to hell with you. It's going to make us less safe, and we're not going to meet those national security objectives, in my opinion.
Well, you raised that tension of paternalism or spreading democracy. That's always the tension there. But I have to ask you about the news tonight, because the president did announce that Venezuela will be turning over 30 to 50 million of barrels of oil to the United States. I read somewhere, I think that's not a huge amount in terms of the amount that we actually use, about 20 million a day at some point over the last several months. But I do wonder about this idea. It could raise for the United States nearly $3 billion if it could find buyers. Does that somehow justify the means to you?
Absolutely not. Because what that means, what Trump's plan here is, okay, so he took out Maduro, but he didn't replace the government. Everything about Maduro is still there. The vice president, his vice president, stepped up, became president. So Trump's idea is, with Maduro out, he can work with supporters of Chavez and Maduro better than he could work with Maduro. And I gather that's what this is. Now, we haven't seen any details. What does this mean? Where is it coming from? Is it actually going to happen?
Is it part of their reserves? Is it traveling over?
Right.
How long?
But the Venezuelan government, right now today, even as Maduro sits in a jail cell in New York or New Jersey or wherever the hell he is no better off than they were before Maduro left. Now, the promise, what Rubio will tell you is, well, we've got people we can work with now, and we're going to make this happen. But
is that what he told you?
Yes, that is basically the argument, is that they feel like they can work with the vice president, they can work with the vice president's brother and somebody else to get a better deal. But the basic problems of Venezuela's economy are still there. And let's keep in mind, we still have a blockade on their oil, a country that is desperately poor. That's why millions of people are leaving it.
So what will the impact of these barrels being turned over? Will that impact the blockade, the embargo in some way?
They haven't said. I mean, maybe, but they haven't said. All they have said is the blockade remains in place.
But so obviously, between the two of us, me a journalist, you a member of Congress, I'd like you to have the answer and know what's going to happen. Are they going to invite Congress into the conversation, or are they going to continue to let you know on a need-to-know basis? Because obviously, every time the president says national security, the Supreme Court has said they get deference. Are you out of the equation?
Of the many problems with what Trump is doing here, the lack of transparency is certainly one.
Of course.
We don't know. You know, I mean,
what can Congress do about it?
We can press them for answers, which we have done, and the Republican majority has been reluctant to help us in that. We need to have a hearing in front of the Armed Services Committee to explain all of this. Thus far, we haven't had that set. We need to be able to ask them questions. They're doing a full House briefing tomorrow, but that's just the Secretary of State pontificating on and on and on and on and on, and then like two random members of Congress getting to ask questions. They need to appear before the committees of jurisdiction and allow us to question them about where this is going, because it all seems like it's sort of being made up as they go along. That's dangerous, particularly when you combine it with what we talked about earlier, about how Trump is alienating all partners and allies and thinking that coercion, force, and threats are the only tool that we have in our toolbox. I think that limited toolbox is going to undermine U.S. national security interests, the very national security interest that he keeps claiming that he's trying to pursue.
Did you guys trust when Rubio gave the briefing? Were you satisfied by what he said?
Well, I mean, it's hard because a lot of times Rubio says, I don't know. We asked him about the pardon of the Honduran president who was I wasn't really in the loop on that. He's the Secretary of State. He's in the middle of all his policy decisions. It's supposed to be all about drugs. You've got a former president of Honduras convicted, not indicted like Maduro, but convicted of trafficking tens of billions of whatever the amount of cocaine was. And Rubio's like, I don't know. I wasn't in that meeting. We asked him about Greenland and got the same sort of response, which is, not my thing. So, he's not really engaging with us. I mean, I don't know if he's out of the loop or he's just not being honest with us. It is quite possible that Trump does sort of make this up as he goes along, but we're not getting the transparent answers. And by the way, when I say we, the American people, that's who we represent. It's not a matter of, members of Congress are upset that they're not being included. We represent the American people. We are supposed to be their voice. We are supposed to exercise oversight of the executive branch, and the Trump administration isn't allowing us to do that, and the Republicans in Congress are abdicating their responsibilities.
Congressman Adam Smith, thank you for joining.
Thanks, Laura. Appreciate the chance.
Still ahead.